She was just a girl alone in the Appalachian wilds, forgotten by the world. He was left to die bound, broken, thrown into the snow like yesterday's mistake. No name, no memory, just pain. And no one came, except her. And Milo, the old German shepherd who had already lost everything once. What happened next will test what you believe about loyalty, choice, and love stronger than duty. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. If you believe that even the forgotten can become someone's hero, if you believe that dogs are more than tools, they're family, then hit that subscribe button. Because this story will stay with you long after the snow melts. The wind howled through the Appalachian backwoods of North Carolina, a symphony of branches cracking under the weight of snow and the low moan of trees bending in protest. It was January, and the mountains lay hushed in white, wrapped in a cold so deep it seemed to silence even time itself. Somewhere near the edge of Pisgah National Forest, hidden from any road, nestled a small cabin with a crooked chimney and wood siding weathered gray by the seasons. Its windows flickered with faint light, the only sign of life for miles. Inside, Lena Whitmore, a 10-year-old girl with pale skin, wide hazel eyes, and tangled chestnut hair that hadn't seen a comb in weeks, slept curled beneath a patchwork quilt stitched decades ago by hands that no longer held hers. Her face was smudged with soot, and her limbs thin from too many meals missed. Orphaned after a car crash took her parents 3 years ago, she had been taken in by her grandfather until a heart attack left her truly alone last spring. Rather than be sent to foster care, Lena had fled into the woods, back to the cabin her grandfather once called a sanctuary. Here, she taught herself to survive, gathering wood, fishing through ice holes, reading moldy books stacked floor to ceiling. Her only companion was Milo, a black and tan German shepherd with a grizzled muzzle and one cloudy amber eye. He had wandered into Lena's life the winter after her grandfather died, skinny, half-starved, one ear torn at the tip, and fur patchy along his rib cage. Lena had found him half buried in snow, tied to a rusted chain left nailed into a tree stump behind the cabin. Someone had abandoned him to die. She had untied the chain, taken him in, and fed him scraps until he could stand again. When she'd asked what to call him, the name had come unbidden from the back of her mind. Milo, her favorite name from a children's book her mother once read aloud at bedtime. She didn't know if the name meant anything to him, but when she'd whispered it into his ear, his tail had thumped once, and so it stuck. Tonight, the fire had burned low. Outside, the sky was ink dark, full of heavy snow clouds and a moon veiled in gray. Lena stirred beneath the covers as a sharp bark sliced through the silence. "Milo?" she mumbled, voice groggy with sleep. Another bark came, this time louder, urgent. Lena sat up. Milo stood at the door, tail stiff, his whole body pointed outward like an arrow. He turned his head once toward her, gave a sharp whine, then pawed at the door. She pulled on her wool coat, her boots, and slipped outside with him, clutching a flashlight nearly out of batteries. The snow was falling in thick flakes now, the kind that clung to eyelashes and muted the world. Milo darted ahead, nose low to the ground, barking once more before disappearing down the trail they had worn thin from daily foraging. "Milo, wait!" she hissed, trying to keep up. She followed him through the dark forest, ducking low branches and nearly tripping on buried rocks. The flashlight flickered, casting jittery light over tree trunks and drifts of snow. After 10 minutes they reached a shallow ravine, where a frozen stream snaked through a hollow of bent pine trees. And there, at the base of a snow-draped cedar, was a man. He lay on his side, limbs twisted unnaturally, wrists bound behind him with coarse rope, his coat soaked through with ice. His face was pale, lips blue. A smear of dried blood crusted over one temple. For a moment, Lena froze. Her breath caught. Milo moved forward and sniffed the man's face, then sat and let out a deep, low bark. Lena edged closer. She couldn't leave him. She knew too well what it meant to be abandoned. She knelt beside him. "Hey, sir, can you hear me?" There was no answer. His breath came in shallow gasps, but it came. His hair was dark, flecked with snow, his jawline sharp beneath a light beard. He looked to be in his 30s, maybe 40s. On the ground near his hand, something glinted. Lena picked it up. A cracked police badge, the kind her grandfather once carried. One half was missing, and the letters were scratched, but she could still read Caleb M. She pocketed it quickly, more out of instinct than thought. Then she began cutting the ropes with the small camping knife she always kept tied to her belt. "I don't know who you are," she whispered, "but we're not leaving you here." With great effort, she and Milo dragged the man half-carried, half-dragged through the snow back to the cabin. It took over an hour. By the time they arrived, her fingers were numb and Milo's breath came in sharp pants. She managed to get the man onto the cot by the fire and wrapped him in every blanket they had. His eyes fluttered open once, barely, and he whispered something she couldn't hear. Lena sat beside him, feeding the fire until it roared, casting flickering gold across the room. Milo lay at the foot of the cot, watching the man with a gaze that was neither hostile nor welcoming, just wary and waiting. Morning broke through the grim veil of clouds, but the light that filtered into the cabin was pale, washed out, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the icy stillness outside. Snow continued to fall gently, settling like powder on the windowsills and softening the hard lines of the trees beyond. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled quietly, its glow casting long shadows across the rough wooden floor. The stranger remained motionless beneath a mound of wool blankets, though the bluish tint had faded from his lips, and color, if faint, had returned to his cheeks. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor, her back resting against the stone hearth. In her lap lay an open book, the pages brittle from age, its margins crowded with her grandfather's neat handwritten notes. She didn't read, though. Her eyes drifted again and again to the figure on the cot. Milo sat near the doorway, his body still, his ears pointed forward. His one good eye never left the stranger. He hadn't barked again, not since they brought the man home, but his tension hadn't eased. Every time the man shifted in his sleep, Milo would stiffen and issue a low, throaty growl. Lena had fed the man warm broth, half potato, half water, using a chipped spoon and a trembling hand. She'd wrapped his wrists in soft cloth torn from an old flannel shirt. His breath had steadied. Now all she could do was wait. Then the stranger stirred. It began with a twitch of his fingers, a slight groan. He shifted his legs, face tightening in confusion, and then slowly, cautiously, his eyes opened. They were pale green, bloodshot, ringed with fatigue and pain. He stared at the ceiling beams for several seconds before his gaze flicked toward the fire, then toward Lena, and finally to Milo, who stood now, a low growl vibrating in his throat. "Where?" the man rasped, voice dry as ash. "You're safe," Lena said softly. "You were tied up in the snow. I found you. Well, Milo found you." Milo found... The man's brow furrowed. "Snow? You don't remember?" He blinked again, then winced and raised a hand to his temple. "No. Nothing. My head. It's like fog." Lena reached to the table and offered him a small tin cup of lukewarm tea. "Here. Drink slow." He took it with shaky fingers. The tea dribbled slightly down his chin, and Milo took a step forward, nostrils twitching. Lena held up a hand toward the dog. "It's okay," she whispered. "He's awake now." Milo did not retreat, but he didn't advance further either. The man glanced at the dog, his eyes narrowing slightly. "He yours?" "No," Lena said. "He's his own, but he stays with me." The man tried to sit up. Pain etched itself into the lines on his face. "You're alone out here?" Lena hesitated. "Yes, my grandfather. He used to live here with me. He's gone now. I've been fine. I know how to trap squirrels and boil water and chop wood. And read. I read a lot." The man gave a small, surprised smile. "You're a strong little thing." Lena tilted her head. "You have a name?" He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "I don't know. Nothing comes. I get flashes, noise, faces, a siren maybe, something red." She nodded slowly. "Okay, then I'll call you something, just until you remember." The man raised an eyebrow. "How about Cal?" Lena said. "Short, strong, feels right." He shrugged. "Cal, huh? That'll work." Milo growled again. This time, Lena noticed it wasn't just a sound. It was the way his body bristled, the way his stare had turned hard. She followed his gaze and saw what Cal was holding, her grandfather's small carving knife, which had been sitting on the table. Cal had picked it up absent-mindedly, perhaps out of habit, his fingers running along the dull edge. "Milo, no!" Lena darted forward, placing herself between them. "It's okay. He's not hurting anyone. Milo didn't back down immediately. His teeth bared slightly, not in full aggression, but in warning. Cal froze. Whoa, I wasn't going to do anything, just didn't even realize I'd grabbed it. He gets protective, Lena said, lowering her voice. She reached up and slowly took the knife from Cal's hand, placing it back on the table. He doesn't trust easy. Someone hurt him before, left him in the woods tied up, just like you. Cal's gaze softened as he looked at the dog. Then he and I might have more in common than I thought. Milo seemed to sense something shift. He gave one short huff, then stepped back to the corner and sat down, still watching, still wary. Lena returned to her spot near the fire. If you want to get better fast, you need to rest and eat. I've got soup, kind of. Cal chuckled weakly. Soup kind of sounds like a feast right now. She handed him another cup. You can stay until you remember who you are. Then you can decide what to do. But you have to help chop wood if you're staying. Cal smiled. Deal. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the wind outside. Milo eventually lay down, though his ears never relaxed. Cal looked around the cabin, the cracked stone fireplace, the shelves crammed with old tools and yellowing paperbacks, the thick quilts patched a dozen times. This place, he murmured, it feels like memory, like something I've seen in a dream. Lena didn't answer. She only nodded and fed another log into the fire. The flames jumped, casting orange light on all three of them. For now, that was enough. The wind that blew through the pines had shifted. It was sharper now, colder in a way that cut through fabric and skin alike. The snow had stopped falling the previous night, leaving behind a landscape that shimmered under pale morning light. Everything was frozen branches glazed in ice, deer tracks locked in crusted snow, the forest silent in reverence or warning. Inside the cabin, the silence had changed too. Cal had started to wake from his fevered sleep more often. His strength was returning, though his mind still staggered under the weight of confusion. He spent much of his time by the fire, staring into it like it might whisper back what the darkness had stolen from his thoughts. Sometimes, Lena caught him clenching his fists as if remembering something too distant to grasp. Lena had adjusted quickly to his presence. She remained cautious, but curious. She offered food, handed him books, asked gentle questions, but never pried. That wasn't her way. She had learned long ago that silence could be safer than truth. But it was Milo who changed the least. The old German shepherd had resumed his station near the door, ears twitching at every creak of the wind. He'd begun sleeping with one eye open again, as if expecting the outside world to crash back into their fragile peace. Then, the dreams began. It was the third night since Cal had regained consciousness. The fire had dimmed to embers, the cabin bathed in a faint orange glow. Lena slept bundled under two quilts, Milo curled at her feet. Cal, on the other cot, thrashed suddenly, his breathing rapid, lips trembling with words unsaid. No, no, get down! Milo! Milo! Lena sat up instantly, heart pounding. She turned and saw Cal's face bathed in sweat, his eyes still shut tight, fists clenched. He mumbled something about fire, smoke, barking, gunshots. Milo, he breathed again, then gasped awake. Milo was already standing, staring at him. Cal sat up, rubbing his temples. I saw something. Fire. A warehouse, maybe? And Milo. He was barking. There was shouting. I don't know if it's a memory or just my mind breaking. Lena swallowed. Milo's name. You said it like you knew him. Cal looked up. I did. I think I did. Not this Milo, but I don't know. It felt real. Like he was beside me in something dangerous. Like we were partners. Lena was quiet for a moment. What if you're remembering who you were? I don't know if I want to, Cal admitted. The next day, Lena took Milo on their usual patrol, a slow loop through the trees behind the cabin, down to the frozen stream and back again. She needed to think. So did Milo, she assumed. She never leashed him. He was too old and wise for that, and he always stayed close. That morning, as they circled around a thicket of bare spruce, Milo suddenly stopped. He growled low, then veered sharply off-path, nose to the ground. Lena followed carefully, heart thudding. 100 feet from the main trail, beneath a tangle of branches heavy with snow, Milo began digging. His movements were fast but purposeful. No panic, just urgency. After a minute, his claws scraped something fabric. Lena dropped beside him and brushed away snow with her gloves. It was a jacket, torn at the shoulder, one sleeve missing, but unmistakable. A navy blue tactical jacket, the kind she'd seen in her grandfather's old photos. On the left breast pocket, the embroidery was still legible despite the dirt and ice. K-9 Unit, North Carolina. Lena stared at it. Cal? Was he a dog handler? Milo didn't respond, of course, but he sat down beside the jacket and stared at it as if he recognized more than she could comprehend. Lena lifted the garment, inspecting it. There were bloodstains near the collar and what looked like a bullet graze at the back. Then she noticed something else. When they returned to the cabin, Lena waited until Cal was napping again before kneeling beside Milo. She gently brushed his side, parting the fur near his lower belly. There it was, a faded tattoo, partially obscured by old scars. The numbers were difficult to read, but one thing was clear, K9 to 34M. Milo, she whispered. You really were one of them. Milo turned his head away as if ashamed. He stood and padded across the room, lying down with his back to her. Lena felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't know everything that had happened to him, but the signs were there. The scarred ears, the cloudy eye, the way he refused to respond to loud sounds or flashing lights. He wasn't just abandoned. He'd survived something violent, something no dog should ever have gone through alone. That night, Cal sat with the jacket in his lap, turning it over slowly. I remember this, he murmured. I had one just like it. Mine. Mine was burned, though, after the explosion. Lena looked up. Explosion? Cal frowned. A raid. Something went wrong. I had a dog with me. Big guy. Smart. Loyal. He barked before anyone else heard the noise. Saved my life. He glanced toward Milo, who lay curled near the hearth. I think it might have been him. Or someone like him. I don't know what happened after. Lena said nothing. She only stood and laid the jacket beside him. Then maybe he saved you twice. The cold had settled into every crack and crevice of the cabin, creeping in like a patient ghost. The forest outside lay beneath a hard crust of ice, the trees swaying gently as if murmuring secrets to one another. It had been nearly a week since Cal was found, and though the air inside the cabin was warm, the weight of memory, the fragments and flickers hung heavy over its 3 inhabitants. That morning, Lena rummaged through a wooden trunk tucked beneath her grandfather's workbench. Dust bloomed into the air as she lifted the lid. Inside were bundles of wires, tarnished tools, and a rusted metal box, an old radio receiver, heavy and dented. She wiped it clean with her sleeve and set it on the table, curiosity glowing in her eyes. I think this still works, she mumbled to herself. Cal looked up from the fireplace where he was mending a torn sleeve with clumsy stitches. His hands still trembled sometimes, especially when the wind howled too loud or the fire popped without warning. Milo lay near him, his tail thudding softly against the floor in rhythm with the flames. Lena fiddled with the knobs, adjusting the frequency dial with slow precision. The machine groaned and clicked as it woke from its long slumber. Static burst through the speaker, a jagged hiss that filled the room. She turned the gain knob slowly, careful not to overload the fragile circuits. Then, amid the static, a voice broke through. This is an official broadcast from the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation. We are continuing the search for Special Agent Caleb Moore, missing in action since December 19th, during a covert operation targeting human trafficking cells in western districts. Any citizen with information is encouraged to contact local authorities. Last seen wearing tactical uniform believed to be armed. Agent Moore is presumed injured and possibly suffering from memory impairment. The voice trailed off into static again. Lena froze. Her fingers hovered over the dial. Cal stood slowly, the color draining from his face. He staggered back a step, as if the words had struck him physically. Caleb Moore, he whispered. That's me. Milo stood as well, ears perked, his entire body tense. And then he barked. Once, sharp and echoing. Then again. It wasn't his usual warning bark. It was different. Recognition. Alarm. A sound Lena had never heard from him before. Cal looked down at the dog. Milo, is that you? His voice cracked with something deeper than memory. Emotion surged behind his eyes like a dam finally breaking. Milo took a slow step forward, then another, and finally crossed the space between them. He rested his head gently on Caleb's knee. Cal reached down, shaking, and touched the dog's ears, trailing his fingers along the familiar torn edge. "I thought you were gone. I thought we were both gone." Lena watched in silence, heart pounding in her chest. It was all clicking into place. The dreams, the canine jacket, the name, the way Milo had always watched Cal not like a stranger but like someone he used to know. "You were partners," she said softly. Cal nodded, tears brimming. "Yeah, he was mine. We worked together for 3 years. We trained in Asheville. Milo, he was the best damn dog I'd ever handled. Loyal, smarter than half the team. We were undercover, tracking a ring that was trafficking kids through the mountains. Something went wrong. We were ambushed. There was fire. I remember now. We were separated. I got hit. I didn't think he'd survived." Milo's tail thumped gently against the wooden floor, though his eyes remained calm, almost weary. He had found Caleb, and Caleb had found him, but nothing about their reunion was triumphant. It was something quieter, wounded, earned. Lena stepped closer. "You were both lost, and now you're both here. That has to mean something." Cal smiled at her, a small, weary smile. "It means we've still got work to do." Later that day, Lena climbed up to the cabin's tiny loft space. It had once been her reading nook, but now she used it as a lookout post. From there, you could see the curve of the stream and the bare stretch of trail where footprints always disappeared after a snowfall. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring out into the vast whiteness. Below, Caleb sat with the radio again, trying to tune in other channels. Milo lay next to him, one paw resting against Caleb's boot. Lena watched them, and for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. The silence between the three of them was no longer empty. It was full of memory, hope, and a fragile trust. That night, as snow began falling once again, Lena wrote in her notebook, a habit she had kept since her grandfather passed. She wrote, "He remembers now. Milo, too. They found each other again like ghosts in the trees. Maybe I wasn't meant to save him. Maybe they were both meant to find their way back to the world through me. I don't know what happens next, but I think we're stronger together." Downstairs, the fire glowed steadily. Outside, in the distance, an owl called once then silence. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the mountains drenched in silence. Snow crusted the treetops like powdered sugar, glinting in the midday sun that broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The forest was still, and every breath came out in clouds of white. Caleb stood at the edge of the tree line near the cabin, one hand shielding his eyes from the glare as he scanned the ridge beyond the stream. In his other hand, he held a folded scrap of paper, partially burned, water-stained, but unmistakably a map. He'd drawn it 2 days ago, scratching lines from flickers of memory that had returned like half-formed dreams. Roads that twisted through the woods, a creek, a cliff, a red truck. Somewhere out there in the miles of frozen wilderness lay the answers he needed. Behind him, Milo sat patiently, his black and tan coat blending with the shaded underbrush, ears erect and eyes alert. His gait had grown more purposeful since the radio broadcast. He was no longer just watching Caleb, he was reading him, syncing steps, breathing in the same rhythm. Old instincts, long buried, were waking again. Caleb turned to Lena, who stood in the doorway of the cabin wrapped in her grandfather's oversized coat, sleeves too long for her arms. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her expression betrayed quiet worry. "I won't be long," Caleb said, "just far enough to see if this place is real." Lena nodded, her eyes dropping to Milo. "Take care of each other." Caleb gave her a soft smile, then whistled once. Milo responded instantly, rising to his feet and following at Caleb's side as they crossed the frozen creek and began their descent toward the eastern ridge. The trek was slow. The snow had drifted deep in some areas, forcing them to trudge waist-deep between fallen trees and slippery rocks. But Milo moved with surprising strength, his body lean but trained, cutting paths through dense brush like he was born for it. 3 hours into their search, the terrain began to change. The trees thinned, the ground sloped downward, and then, like a ghost from memory, they saw it. The truck. It was buried up to the wheel wells in snow, rusted red paint just barely visible beneath a thick white shell. The front windshield was cracked. The rear door hung open, twisted off its hinge. Caleb slowed, breathing hard, his pulse echoing in his ears. As they approached, the silence deepened. Milo stiffened, nose raised, then padded forward cautiously, sniffing around the base of the vehicle. Caleb opened the passenger side door. It creaked in protest. Inside, the cab was a frozen tomb. Papers lay scattered, soaked through and frozen solid. A dark stain bloomed across the seat-dried blood. He reached behind the driver's seat and pulled out a canvas bag. Inside, to his surprise, was a small spiral notebook wrapped in wax paper. It was partially burned on the edges, but most of the contents were intact. He opened it. Names, locations, time stamps, handwriting he recognized as his own. One page stood out. It wasn't notes, but a sketch done hastily in pencil, slightly smudged. It was Milo's face, the droop of one ear, the scar above his right eye. Underneath, in block letters, "The last thing I trust." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I drew this," he murmured, "after we got separated. I must have thought I wasn't going to make it out." Milo sat beside him now, panting lightly, snow melting on his back. He looked at Caleb with those amber eyes, calm, steady, forgiving. "You saved me more than once," Caleb said, voice low. "You were my partner." He reached out and rubbed Milo's head gently. "Guess I owe you another one." The wind picked up, ruffling the edges of the notebook as Caleb flipped to the final page. There was a list names he didn't recognize at first, but then one caught his eye. Victor Harlan, a former agent. Caleb remembered him now, tall, lean, always slick in his words but cold behind the eyes. They'd worked the same task force, but Victor had vanished just before the mission went south. Caleb closed the notebook, jaw clenched. He was part of it. He sold us out. They searched the area surrounding the truck. Nearby, Caleb spotted boot prints, old but distinct, frozen into the earth before the last snowfall. One set, dragging slightly, as if someone had limped. They followed the trail for nearly a mile, ending at a grove of tall pine trees where a fire pit lay buried under ash and snow. Milo sniffed the ground and let out a sharp bark, pawing at something. Caleb knelt and found a spent shell casing, partially sunken in ice. Fresh fear spread through his gut. Whoever had been here had a gun, and if he was right, Victor wasn't done yet. When they returned to the cabin, it was late afternoon. Lena rushed outside as soon as she saw them, her eyes darting between Caleb's face and the notebook in his hand. "I found it," he said simply. "The truck. And this." He handed her the notebook. Lena sat on the porch steps, flipping through the pages in silence. She paused at the sketch of Milo, her fingers lingering on the worn page. Caleb sat beside her. "Milo wasn't just a dog I worked with. He was the only reason I survived that mission. He warned me when things went south, pulled me from the fire. I thought I lost him, but he found me again." Lena didn't say anything at first. Then she turned to Milo, who had laid down beside the woodpile, tail twitching. "He was never just a dog to me," she whispered. "He's the reason I'm still here too." They sat there for a long time, watching the light fade behind the ridge. The wind carried a different weight that night. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy with something unseen, something felt in the bones more than heard in the ears. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing outside the cabin, staring into the dark pines. The moon hung low and sharp, casting long shadows across the snow. Milo stood beside him, his head slightly tilted, one paw lifted, ears forward. He hadn't moved in minutes. Something was out there. The unease had started earlier in the day. Caleb had been chopping wood when Milo suddenly froze mid-step, nose high, growling low in his throat. Caleb followed his gaze but saw nothing. Still, he'd trusted Milo's instincts enough to double-check every window and make sure the rifle, an old .22 his grandfather once used for squirrels, was cleaned and loaded. Now, as night fell, the forest whispered again. Inside, Lena read quietly near the fire, wrapped in her thickest blanket. She hadn't said much since Caleb returned from the truck. She was thinking, processing, as she always did, thoughtful and silent, a trait she must have inherited from someone long gone. Caleb turned to Milo. "You smell him, don't you?" Milo gave no response, only moved 3 slow steps forward and stopped again. Then came the sound. Crunch. A footstep, deliberate but too close to be chance. Another crunch. Caleb narrowed his eyes and stepped closer to the trees. "Who's there?" No answer. He raised the rifle but didn't fire. "Come out, or I'll send the dog." Silence. Then swift movement. A shadow bolted from behind the tree line and disappeared into the dark. Milo shot forward in a blur of motion, barking fiercely. Caleb followed, heart hammering in his chest. The snow swallowed their sounds quickly, but Milo's barks cut cleanly through. Caleb sprinted into the trees, rifle lowered but ready. He caught sight of two figures in the moonlight, Milo leaping onto a man's chest, knocking him backward into the snow with a heavy thud. The stranger cried out, a sharp grunt of surprise and pain. Caleb reached them just as Milo was snarling above the man's throat, teeth bared. The stranger struggled underneath, one gloved hand reaching for something in his belt. "Back off," Caleb ordered. "Milo, hold." To his surprise, Milo obeyed instantly, stepping back but still growling, body tense. The man rolled to his side, gasping. His hood fell back, and Caleb froze. "Victor," he breathed. The man on the ground, mid-40s, wiry frame with a narrow face, hollow cheeks, and blue eyes like cracked ice grinned through bloodied lips. "Well, hell," Victor Harlan said. "Look who woke up." Caleb lowered the rifle an inch. "What the hell are you doing here?" Victor spat to the side. "You're a hard man to kill, Caleb." "I could say the same." Victor began to rise, slowly, hands up. "I didn't come to finish it. Not yet. Just wanted to see if it was true, you and the mutt both still breathing." Milo snarled louder at the insult. "You sold us out," Caleb said, voice low. "I remember now. The raid. You vanished right before it all went to hell." Victor chuckled. "Not vanished. Relocated. Some of us don't want to die for a lost cause. You think we were really going to break that ring? You think those kids ever had a chance?" Caleb stepped closer, fury rising. "You left people to die." "I did what I had to," Victor replied, "and I'm still alive." "You won't be if you come near this place again." Victor's eyes flicked to Milo. "You're lucky the dog still trusts you. Last I saw him, he was bleeding out near the riverbank. You should have stayed in the dark, Caleb. Now you've put that little girl in danger too." That was the final line. Caleb raised the rifle. "Get out! Now!" Victor backed away, hands still up. All right. But this isn't over. You stirred the ashes, buddy. Someone else will come looking, and they won't just be curious." With that, he vanished into the trees. Milo chased until Caleb called him back. They returned to the cabin with adrenaline still burning in their blood. Lena met them at the door, wide-eyed. "I saw someone through the window," she whispered. "Are you okay?" Caleb nodded grimly. "It was Victor, a man I once trusted. He's working with whoever set up that ambush." Lena looked at Milo, who limped slightly as he entered. There was a shallow cut across his shoulder, nothing deep, but enough to sting. She rushed forward and began cleaning it with a damp cloth. Milo didn't flinch. He only leaned into her hand. Later, after patching up Milo and bolting every window, the three of them sat near the fire in silence. Caleb broke it. "After this ends," he said, voice quiet, "I'm going to talk to the department. I want Milo back on the roster. He deserves to go out with honor, with a purpose." Lena didn't respond at first. She just ran her fingers through Milo's fur, slow and steady. "If that's what he wants," she finally whispered, "I won't stop him. But I won't ask him to stay just for me." Milo lifted his head, gazing at her with something older than instinct, something almost human. The air had shifted again. The snow, once soft and hushed, had hardened into glassy sheets that cracked beneath every step. The clouds above churned like bruises, low and heavy, blotting out what little light remained. Caleb stood outside the cabin sharpening his grandfather's axe, breath fogging the steel as he moved it across the stone with rhythmic care. Milo lay nearby, ears alert but calm, watching the tree line. Lena was inside, mending one of Milo's blankets, her fingers moving delicately, though her brow was furrowed. She hadn't said much since the encounter with Victor. Caleb had respected her silence, though the weight of his own thoughts pressed hard against his ribs. Then, without warning, a single gunshot tore through the stillness. The axe dropped to the snow with a thud. Milo shot to his feet and growled low. Caleb snatched the rifle from beside the door, eyes scanning the trees. Then a voice called out. Familiar. Mocking. "Easy now, Caleb. Don't shoot your old friend." Victor Harlan emerged from the trees like a ghost from a grave, dressed in dark winter fatigues, his narrow face sharp with cold and satisfaction. He held a semi-automatic pistol low but steady, his finger loose over the trigger. Blood crusted his cheek from their last fight, and a fresh bruise darkened one temple. He looked wilder now, desperate. "You came back," Caleb said, leveling the rifle. "Should have known cowardice wasn't your only trick." Victor grinned, teeth bared like a wolf's. "You poked too deep. You don't get to walk away now." He raised the gun and fired. Caleb dove sideways, the shot grazing his upper arm. He hit the snow hard, rolling behind a fallen log. Blood seeped through the fabric of his jacket. Milo sprang forward, barking furiously, but Caleb shouted, "No! Stay back!" Victor advanced slowly, methodically. "You think this is some redemption arc, that you and the mutt and the girl get to ride off into the sunset?" He moved closer. Inside the cabin, Lena screamed. Caleb groaned and tried to rise, but his vision swam. The pain was sharp, numbing. He looked up and saw Victor step over the log, pointing the gun straight at his face. Then Milo stepped between them. Not charging, not attacking, just standing. His tail low, his ears flat, but his spine straight and unmoving. Victor hesitated. "You're still alive, huh? You remember me, don't you? I trained you. I fed you. You were mine before he ever got to you." Milo didn't move. Victor smirked. "You were a tool, a weapon, and I was the hand that used you. Come on, boy. Come home." And Milo did move. One step forward, deliberate, eyes fixed on Victor. Caleb watched, breath held, heart screaming. Milo took another step, slow. Then he stopped. And then the wind changed. It carried the scent of pine sap and wood smoke, the faint trace of Lena's scent through the open cabin door. A memory sparked her soft hands, brushing his fur, her voice whispering through the night, the shared crusts of bread, the laughter when he chased snowflakes for her amusement. Her fear, her silence, her strength. In his mind flashed the flashlights and gunfire of old missions, Caleb's voice barking orders, the ache of the final blast that separated him from everything he knew. Then, Lena's voice in the dark, calling him family. Victor raised the gun again. "Come on, do what you were trained for." Milo's lips curled, not in submission, but in defiance. And then he turned abruptly, violently, and bolted back toward the cabin, toward Lena, who stood at the doorway, barefoot in the snow, shaking. Milo skidded in front of her and planted himself squarely between her and Victor, hackles raised. Victor barked a laugh, distracted. "Seriously?" That distraction was all Caleb needed. He surged forward from behind the log, slammed into Victor's side, knocking the pistol free. It skidded across the ice. The two men grappled, fists flying, crunching into snow and frozen mud. Victor was fast, but Caleb had fury, pain, memory, and Milo. The dog joined the fray just long enough to knock Victor off balance with a powerful shove of his shoulder. It was all Caleb needed. He pinned Victor face down, forcing his arm into the snow until it twisted with a crack. Victor howled. Lena ran to Caleb's side, her face pale but focused. "Is he—" "He's done," Caleb panted. "But he's not dead. He'll answer for what he did." They tied Victor's hands with rope from the woodpile and locked him in the tool shed. Caleb leaned against the porch, pressing cloth to his bleeding arm. Lena sat beside him, silent. Milo stood in the snow between them, watching, waiting. Finally, Caleb looked at him and said, "You saved me again." He didn't expect an answer. But Milo walked to Lena, nudged her hand, then turned and padded back to Caleb. He stopped, looked at them both, then laid down between them. Caleb smiled. "I think that's his answer." Later that night, after Victor's threats had faded into the cold, after the fire had warmed their bodies again, Caleb looked over at Milo, resting at Lena's feet, and asked quietly, "So, still think he should come back to the Force?" Lena shook her head slowly. "He's not a mission. Not anymore." She reached down and scratched Milo gently behind the ears. "He's just Milo." Milo licked her hand once, then let out a contented sigh and closed his eyes. The sun broke over the ridge like a promise. Gold spilled over the snow-covered peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, glinting off icicles hanging from cabin eaves, melting the hush of winter one beam at a time. The storm had passed, so had the danger. And in its wake, a fragile peace began to bloom. 3 weeks had passed since the night Victor was captured. The authorities, alerted by Caleb through a secure radio signal and relayed by a ranger patrol station, had reached the cabin 2 days later. Victor was taken into custody with enough evidence, Caleb's journal, the tracker's notebook, and statements to face federal prosecution for conspiracy and attempted murder. His trial would be lengthy. His conviction was almost certain. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing that morning, a wool coat over his shoulders and a sling around his arm. The wound from Victor's bullet was healing, though it still ached when the wind shifted wrong. He watched as Lena tossed a snowball into the air for Milo to chase, her laughter cutting cleanly through the air like wind chimes in spring. Lena's cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes were bright. She no longer flinched when branches cracked or birds startled. She walked taller now, like someone who had found a place in the world. That transformation, more than any arrest, any revelation, was what Caleb held on to most. Milo leapt after the snowball with surprising grace for a dog his age. His black and tan coat had grown thick again, and a new collar-stitched leather, with a silver tag engraved simply, Milo. Family sat snug around his neck. He no longer paced near the door at night. He slept deeply beside Lena's bed, snoring faintly, content. Behind Caleb, a car engine crunched over the frozen path toward the cabin. He turned as a gray SUV pulled up, idling with a soft purr. The passenger door opened, and a tall woman stepped out, bundled in a red scarf and forest green coat. Her hair was silver-streaked, tied into a neat braid. This was Joanne Keller, once a K9 handler like Caleb, now long retired. At 65, she was lean, straight-backed, with a no-nonsense air but kind eyes. Her husband, Thomas Keller, stepped out beside her, a former dispatch supervisor, round-shouldered and soft-voiced, with a weathered face and hands always warm. They had no children of their own, but had raised 2 nephews who'd gone off to college. When Caleb reached out to them with Lena's story, they hadn't hesitated. "Still keeping warm, I hope?" Joanne called, her voice crisp but friendly. Caleb smiled. "The stove helps. So does company." They shared a long look, veterans who had seen more than most and lived to find something gentle on the other side. Lena ran up to them, brushing snow from her sleeves. "Are you the people Caleb said would teach me to make apple jam?" Joanne laughed, bending to hug her. "I sure am. But first, I'll teach you how to identify proper preserving jars. It's serious business." Thomas ruffled Lena's hair gently. "And I'll teach you how to tune a shortwave radio. I heard you have a gift with dials." Milo trotted up, tail wagging, and sniffed both newcomers carefully. He paused a moment at Joanne, as if recognizing something from her stance, the way she extended her hand calmly, palm down, like someone who once gave commands. He bumped his head into her palm and huffed. "You still remember," she whispered. "Good boy." That afternoon, Caleb drove with them down the mountain to the small town of Maple Hollow. The town, once only a dot on his mental map, had become more than coordinates. It was community, a heartbeat, a place where he could begin again. The local sheriff, Raymond Pierce, a barrel-chested man with a deep drawl and thick mustache, welcomed Caleb with a handshake and a nod. "You're not the same Moore I remember," he said, "and that's a compliment." Caleb chuckled. "I'll take it." He joined the department officially a week later, not in tactical response, but as a liaison officer for youth programs and K9 education. He gave talks at the school, showed kids how to treat working dogs with respect. Some days he missed the edge of danger, but mostly he felt whole. He visited the department's newly refurbished K9 Honor Hall just before his first shift. The room was quiet, lined with plaques and photos. One wall bore faded portraits from decades ago, gritty black and white snapshots of German shepherds mid-leap, handlers in crisp uniforms. In the center was a frame he hadn't expected, a photo of Milo in full tactical vest, his younger eyes alert and fierce. Beneath it, a brass plate read, "Milo, K9 Unit 34M, Courage Under Fire." But next to it was a new photo, Milo and Lena seated on an old wooden bench, wrapped in scarves, surrounded by snow. Her hand rested gently on his back, and both of them looked straight at the camera. Peaceful, real. Beneath that image, the inscription simply said, "A hero knows where his heart belongs." Later that evening, back at the Kellers' farmhouse where Lena now lived, Milo lay curled at Lena's feet as she read aloud from a book about the constellations. The fire crackled. The storm had long passed, but its echo remained in the way they now treasured silence. Caleb visited often, never unannounced, never for too long, just enough to sit on the porch, sip weak coffee, and watch a new life unfold. And sometimes, when he looked at Milo Gray creeping into his muzzle, tail thumping slow and steady, he still whispered, "Thank you." Not as a command, not as a handler, but as a friend. Sometimes the strongest warriors wear fur, and the bravest hearts beat not in chests of heroes, but in the silent loyalty of a forgotten dog. Milo didn't choose duty, he chose love, and through that choice, a girl found safety, a man found redemption, and a broken bond was made whole again. This story reminds us, God's miracles don't always come with thunder or light. Sometimes they walk quietly beside us, wrapped in scars, carrying no titles, just unwavering faith. In our lives, we may feel lost, abandoned, or forgotten, but when we choose love over fear, family over pride, and healing over revenge, we honor something far greater than ourselves. That is where the real miracles begin. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Leave a comment below and type Amen if you believe animals are God's messengers of hope. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will restore your faith in goodness. And may God bless you and your loved ones today and always.